This is the decision of the American president, who has made a fetish out of tariffs.
One man who's going to be across all the detail today and the rest of the week is Andrew Neil, who's presenting The Times at 1 today. Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning to you. Big day.
Huge day. Huge, as Donald Trump would say. I can't quite do his accent. Bigly day. We got a bit of a view there from around the world. But, I mean, it's really the UK that we will be focusing on. What are you expecting to see when we get the response from Keir Starmer?
Oh, I don't think there's going to be much of a British carve-out, if any at all. I think we're going to be caught up in the Trump administration's desire to go for universal tariffs of a fair degree, probably 20%, maybe more, across the board. And other countries will retaliate, and we don't yet know what Britain will do. We may retaliate, or we may still think we can spin them along because we're hoping to do our own deal. Though any kind of deal that can be done with America in a short space of time is not going to really be a free trade deal. I think more important than retaliation, the voice note you've just run there from China is actually of huge significance, because what is happening is that some countries are going ahead with free trade without America. And China, Japan, South Korea, the three biggest economies on that Eastern Pacific rim, effectively what they're doing is their own free trade agreement. They're opening up trade between these three countries without America. And I think the European Union needs to start doing that. Britain needs to start doing that as well. The European Union needs to end this stupid punishment beating that it's still trying to give Britain because we voted for Brexit in 2016, and deal with Britain to have a much better free trade deal than the one that we have at the moment. That is the way in the end. If America wants to opt out of the free trade global economy, that's up to America. We should continue without it.
It's such an interesting perspective, Andrew, and it's one that we've kind of touched on here on the programme this morning, but maybe not quite as much as we will tomorrow, because it does seem that what Donald Trump is doing is forcing new relationships, and it may well, in a weird way, make it easier for Keir Starmer to make the argument to the country, to this country, about being closer to the European Union, at least economically now.
Well, closer to anybody that wants to have a free trade deal with us, closer to Canada, closer to Australia, closer to the European Union, closer to Japan, South Korea, which is a hugely strong growing economy, even with China. We know from economic history that economies grow best, the global economy grows most, in an environment of free trade. That is the history of the world after the Second World War, where bit by bit tariffs fell, so did non-tariff barriers, and global prosperity boomed as never before. If America wants to stop the world and jump off, then that's up to America. But it will lose out in the long run, and we shouldn't be obsessed with that. We should get on with doing our own business. After all, we're now moving into a world where we're going to have to look after our own defense without America,
yes,
on whom we have depended for so long. But now we have to do the same on free trade. Look, it's not ideal. You would always want America on board. It's such a big and historically free trade country. Its defense has been integral to our defense. But this is not our decision. This is the decision of the American president, who has made a fetish out of tariffs.
And Andrew, there'll be plenty more. I'm afraid I'm going to have to stop you because we're reaching more to come from you on the Times at 1 today, Andrew Neil.
Let's talk tariffs. Liberation Day looms. What do we think about liberation? I mean, we've all caught on to it. It's being described as Liberation Day. Are you over this, by the way, Claire Fox, Liberation Day, or is it just nice to be able to describe it as something rather than Trump's Tariffs Day?
Well, obviously, on the April Fool's Day point, the idea that it's liberation associated with narrow economic protectionism does seem to me to be rather insulting the whole notion of freedom and liberation. But there we go.
Yes.
I can't say that I'm all over it. I mean, I think that with a lot of the problems that we're encountering in relation to negotiating the Trump America that we live with now, none of us have been sure what it would mean practically. And I fear that Keir Starmer has been kidding himself that somehow UK could avoid the worst aspects of this, and it looks as though that's not to be the case. So, of course, it's a very nerve-wracking period, because I do think that, apart from anything else, it's going to have an impact potentially domestically on the American inflationary situation, might well hurt a lot of ordinary working people in America. That will be interesting. I also don't think it's going to, the notion of, by the way, buying British or, British manufacturer, or any country having regard to their own national industry, is a positive one. But it doesn't work in the way I think that Trump imagines, because if you look at the tariffs against China at the moment, what it's done is it's been a spur to Chinese innovation. They've actually gone off and said, okay, if we can't import from you, we'll develop our own, and they've flown ahead. So it doesn't necessarily damage your enemies in quite the way he imagines.
Although we'd be subject to them, it does also present opportunities, as William Hague's column in The Times says today. We could be a home for anyone affected by tariffs. It could boost UK business if we take the opportunity, and we could import from those countries affected but without, of course, inflicting tariffs on them. So we become more attractive. The flip side to that is we could also become a bit of a bin for cheap foreign imports, which would affect our own standing. Let's hear from David Charter, the assistant US editor for The Times. He talked to me about the sort of far-reaching aim of Donald Trump to punish countries for past wrongs.
What Trump really has in mind is righting the past wrongs that he feels America has suffered. He feels it's been ripped off for decades, and he wants to put that right. And it's this idea of redressing a past wrong, which will, I think, really concern negotiators from Britain and other countries, that Trump wants these tariffs to be on for a bit. He wants to hurt other countries and teach them a lesson. He thinks that they've taken advantage of America.
Michael Binion, what is the answer? How does the UK deal with this?
Very difficult. Keir Starmer has tried to stay out of any kind of tit-for-tat retaliation and think that he can negotiate a separate opt-out for Britain, and that because of this special relationship in all sorts of ways, and because of Trump's sentimental attachment to Britain, which I think is fairly real, particularly because of his mother's ancestry in the Hebrides, that there's a way of Britain avoiding this. It looks as though that's not going to work. And the problem for the British government is, do we then join the Europeans in some kind of retaliatory action and say, yes, we're going to impose reciprocal tariffs on everything American, or do we try to go along with it and negotiate and see if we can survive the present period paying this tariff, or at least our exports will pay the tariff, and try to find a bit of a better deal later on. It's a problem. Starmer's initially tried to just be moderate and flexible and not react. It's getting more and more difficult because it's obvious that our car industry is going to be really hurt.
Yeah, so what would you do in Keir Starmer's
Well, I think I'd cozy up to the Europeans, which is what he's doing, and say, look, if you're taking a tough line with Starmer, we will too.
Is he cozying up to the Europeans?
Well,
he certainly is on defence. But
yes, he is on defence, but I think under the surface he's trying to cozy up to them generally. No, he's trying to have it both ways, actually. That's typical British. We're trying to say, yes, we're with you in Europe, but at the same time say to Trump, actually, we're special, aren't we? We don't need to impose them on us.
Have this deal. Go on, have
it.
Have
it. I'm afraid it won't help us.
Here's Duncan Edwards, CEO of the Transatlantic Trade Organisation, British-American Business. He says retaliatory tariffs aren't the answer.
Tariffs create additional cost for businesses, and therefore retaliatory tariffs do exactly that as well. I know politically there's a temptation to think, well, we'll do this and then we'll show them. But really, the relative impact of the UK imposing tariffs on the US will be greater on the UK than it will be on the United States. So we certainly hope that the UK doesn't do that.
Claire Fox, let's put you in Keir Starmer's shoes. What do you do?
So I think that just imposing tariffs back is the wrong thing to do. But if I can just mention in relation to the EU have actually, I think it's worth noting, used tariffs and are a protectionist trade bloc. And they've used tariffs against America for many years, in fact, not just against America. But and so I think it would be foolish for the UK to necessarily hitch themselves with a trade bloc that's already got a great deal of antagonistic relationship with the US in relation to trade. So I'd be wary of that. I think, however, partly we've got to see how things play out. I do think that the danger is that we become obsessed with the trade aspect, whereas the greater problems that the UK economy's got are not trade or tariffs, but this problem of a low productivity, investment and growth not happening, and domestic policies. So one of the things that we need to be wary of is that we don't just end up allowing this to distract the important work that the British economy needs to happen and end up just blaming Trump for all the problems, because I think that would be a real mistake.
Yeah, there's the response from Keir Starmer in terms of what is the politically best thing to do. Is it to show strength and to team up with the EU and talk about a consensus on retaliatory tariffs, or is it a look at what's economically best for the country? And we know that those tariffs from the United States, 20%, would hit our growth. They take 0.6% of GDP growth. If we imposed reciprocal tariffs, that would increase to 1% of GDP. So there's a real fine line here, really. What is the correct economic response and what is the correct political response? And of course, they intertwine. A couple of our listeners have been getting enthused about boycotting American products. Let's just roll with this one. Claire, would you ever?
No. That's not because of American products. I actually think economic boycotts are more to do with a kind of feel-good narcissism than they are to do with any serious economic policy myself.
Okay. Well, of course, Canada's getting into this, aren't they?
No, I know, but what I think is important is that, look, if you want to try and avoid having an outright trade war, and I am not in any way letting off Trump from having initiated this, I do think it is important that one has cool heads, relatively speaking. And I don't just mean for pragmatic reasons, but because the problem is not necessarily just American goods. So I do not think boycotting American goods is going to have one iota of difference on Trump. And I would rather take the heat out of this situation, not make it worse.
Some of the suggestions we've had don't work either, I'm afraid. Stephen in East Sussex, Coca-Cola and Big Macs. Well, Coca-Cola is produced here. It's not imported, but I guess it is an American company. Big Macs, again, franchises. The McDonald's outlets are franchises. That would affect the UK. OK, yes, an American-owned company, so it would affect them, but only to a small point. People are suggesting, John says you could stop using Amazon to order things if you want to boycott something American. Again, slightly the same issue there. And someone else is here is saying boycott American streaming services, cancel all transatlantic flights. There we go. John in Basingstoke, he's even suggesting boycotting ads. So I've half read that out, John. He's given me a list of ads, which ads we'd like to boycott or we should boycott. Would you, Michael Binion?
No, I hate to agree all the time, but Claire's absolutely right. It's a feel-good factor for yourself. It doesn't make a bean of difference one way or the other. And you can understand the sort of annoyance and say, what is Trump up to and what is he thinking of? But in fact, the much better tactic is to wait it out and see what the reaction in America is, because it's actually not going to work economically in America.
No, it's going to wipe well over $1 trillion.
Well, people are already saying it's going to push up inflation, it's going to undermine business confidence, and in the end that will come back to bite Trump himself.
Let's see what happens to the markets as well tomorrow and ongoing, because that will hurt Donald Trump in language that he understands.